The car nobody respected, Saturday mornings at Blackwood Luxury Motors, always looked the same. Sunlight reflected off rows of polished vehicles worth more than most people's homes. Customers arrived wearing expensive watches and carrying quiet confidence. Salespeople moved carefully, smiling just enough to feel exclusive but not desperate. Every detail was designed to make people believe they had entered a different world. And that morning, the illusion was perfect, until the old sedan rolled in. Its faded silver paint looked almost white under the sun. One headlight seemed slightly newer than the other. The wheels didn't match. The engine sounded uneven but determined. It moved slowly through the entrance and parked awkwardly between two flawless luxury SUVs. One salesman looked at another. Someone quietly laughed. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out wearing worn work boots, faded jeans, and a simple gray shirt. He looked around 35, not old, just tired. The kind of tired that settles behind your eyes after years of carrying responsibilities without complaint. Then a little girl climbed out of the passenger seat. She looked around 10. She wore a yellow hoodie and carried a notebook covered with hand-drawn stars. The man smiled at her immediately. Everything about his face changed. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Do you think they'll let us look?" He smiled again. "We're not here to buy dreams." She looked confused. He crouched and said quietly, "We're here to study them." She grinned. Together they started walking toward the showroom. Inside stood Ethan Cole, top sales consultant, employee of the month 7 times, famous for reading customers within seconds. Designer clothes. Perfect hair, perfect smile, and absolute confidence. He saw the car, and made his decision instantly. Not a Dover. He walked over. "Good morning." The father smiled politely. "Morning." Ethan looked briefly toward the parking lot. "Can I help you?" The father nodded. "My daughter likes cars. We wanted to look around if that's okay." Ethan forced a smile. "Of course," then added, "Just please don't touch anything." The father noticed the tone, but ignored it. The daughter didn't. She looked down. The father changed the subject. "What's your name?" "Ethan." The father nodded. "I. The girl smiled. "I'm Lily." Ethan gave a quick polite nod. Then immediately pointed toward one corner. "Our display area is over there. Not the premium section, not the interactive section. The section tourists used." Daniel understood immediately. "Still, thanks." They walked. Lily moved carefully around every car. She admired details, door lines, wheel shapes, interior stitching. She asked questions. Daniel answered almost everyone. How does suspension work? What makes one engine smoother? Why are headlights shaped differently? His answers were simple, but precise. After 20 minutes, Ethan noticed something. Daniel wasn't guessing. He actually understood engineering. One salesman laughed nearby. "Guy probably watches YouTube." Ethan smiled. Then Lily stopped in front of the newest luxury sedan. Her eyes widened. "Dad." Daniel looked. She whispered, "This one, the flagship. Most expensive car in the showroom." She walked closer, stopped. "Read the information card." Then looked at Daniel. He stared at the car quietly, too quietly. She noticed. He smiled. A little. She looked excited. "You worked on cars before?" He hesitated. "Something like that." Ethan approached. "This model isn't open." Lily stepped back. "Oh, sorry." Daniel nodded politely. "No problem." But Ethan stayed there, watching, then said, "You know, these are handcrafted machines, not really the type people usually come to admire." Daniel looked at him. "What type of people?" Ethan smiled. "Message delivered." Nearby staff smiled quietly. Daniel simply nodded. Lily understood. Children always understand. "Dad, maybe we should go." Daniel smiled softly. "We can leave." They turned. Then Lily stopped. She looked back at the luxury sedan and quietly asked, "If you had enough money, would you buy this one?" Daniel looked at the car, then smiled strangely. "No." She blinked. "No?" He looked carefully at the vehicle, then said, I'd build it differently. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. Several employees turned. Ethan crossed his arms. You'd build it differently? Daniel nodded. Probably. Ethan smiled wider. What would you change? Lily suddenly looked nervous, but Daniel answered. The front weight balance. Ethan smirked. Daniel continued. The steering response. Then, the seat support angle. Then, the seat stopped smiling. Now Ethan stopped. Daniel looked at the car and the rear chassis tuning. Silence. Ethan frowned. How would you know? Daniel smiled. Ethan folded his arms. You know, people spend years learning these things. Daniel nodded. I know. Ethan looked at the old sedan outside, then looked back. So what do you drive? Daniel glanced outside. That. A salesman laughed. Well, maybe improve that first. A few employees chuckled. Lily lowered her head. Daniel stayed calm. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, Come on. They started walking out, then the showroom doors opened. Everything changed. Straightened instantly. Staff stood taller. Someone whispered, the CEO. No announcements. Had arrived unexpectedly. No announcements. And the first thing he saw was Daniel. The CEO stopped walking, looked again. His face changed, confusion. Then something nobody expected, recognition. He slowly stepped forward, eyes locked on the single father, and asked quietly, Daniel? Daniel turned, looked at him. Small smile. Hey. The entire showroom froze. The CEO stared. Then looked outside, at the old sedan, then back at Daniel, and asked the question that would destroy the room's assumptions. Wait, is that your car? Daniel nodded. The CEO looked at everyone, then asked, Do any of you know who built that car? Nobody answered. The CEO smiled and said, The man nobody recognized. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Not Ethan, not the reception staff, not the managers, not even Lily. The showroom that usually echoed with polished sales conversations and quiet luxury suddenly felt too silent. Everyone looked at Daniel, then at the CEO, then back again. Ethan forced a laugh. But the CEO wasn't smiling. His expression had changed completely. Respect, shock, and something that looked almost personal. He stepped closer. Daniel Mercer? Daniel gave a small nod. Been a while. The CEO stared. Then unexpectedly reached out and shook Daniel's hand with both hands. Not professional, not formal, grateful. That changed everything. Managers looked at each other. One quietly whispered, You know him? The CEO turned slowly, then said, He looked back at Daniel. I wouldn't be standing here without him. Now people stopped pretending. Nobody laughed anymore. Ethan's confidence disappeared little by little. Daniel noticed. He immediately tried to reduce the attention. You don't have to do this. The CEO looked surprised. Do what? Daniel smiled. Turn a visit, shook it into a scene. No. The CEO looked around. This isn't a scene. His voice became serious. This is overdue. Lily looked up at her father. She tugged his sleeve. Dad. Daniel looked down. She whispered, You know the CEO? Daniel smiled awkwardly. A little. The CEO heard that and laughed. A little, then looked at Lily. Your father changed this company. She blinked. My dad? The CEO crouched to her level. What's your name? Lily. He smiled. Lily, do you know why our cars feel different? She shook her head. The CEO pointed gently toward the flagship model. That car exists because of ideas your father created. The room became silent again. Lily slowly turned toward Daniel. She stared at him. Her expression changed. Not excitement, confusion, because children notice something adults miss. If her father was so important, why did they live the way they lived? She asked the question softly. Dad. Daniel already knew. He smiled. We'll talk later. But the CEO stood and said, No. Everyone looked at him. He looked at Daniel. Actually, I think they should know. Daniel's smile disappeared slightly. The CEO noticed, then softened. Only if you're okay with it. Daniel stayed quiet. The managers waited finally. Daniel sighed. You always did talk too much. The CEO laughed, then turned to everyone. Gather around. Ethan slowly moved closer. Ethan stayed near the front, trying to understand. 10 years ago, this company almost didn't exist. People looked surprised. Most employees had joined later. They only knew success, luxury campaigns, expansion, record sales. The CEO continued. We had investors. What we didn't have, he looked at Daniel, was a car. The room stayed silent. The CEO walked toward the flagship sedan. He touched the hood. This vehicle's foundation was born from sketches. He turned, and those sketches came from him. People stared. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Daniel wasn't a manager. He wasn't famous. He wasn't connected. He was just an engineer. Ethan frowned. Engineer? Daniel didn't look like one. Then again, that thought suddenly embarrassed him. The CEO continued. We hired dozens of experienced people. They gave presentations, they made reports, they explained why things couldn't work. Then he smiled. Daniel showed up late to an interview carrying a backpack. Some employees laughed quietly. The CEO pointed. He sat down and told me our entire concept was wrong. Even Daniel smiled at that. The CEO continued. I asked if he understood what we were building. Daniel interrupted quietly. You were building expensive disappointment. Several employees looked shocked. The CEO laughed. That's exactly what he said. Now people actually laughed. But nobody was mocking. The CEO continued. I asked him what he would build instead. He pointed at the flagship, and he drew it. Everyone looked at the car. The CEO shook his head. He corrected himself. No, he drew the feeling of it. That sentence stayed in the room. The CEO looked away. He talked about balance, weight, driver trust, how luxury should feel earned, not loud. People listened carefully. The CEO smiled. I hired him immediately. Then his expression changed, and for 3 years, he barely went home. Daniel looked. The CEO noticed, but continued. He solved problems nobody else could. He redesigned systems. He worked nights. He saved millions. Then, the CEO stopped. His voice became quieter. He resigned. Nobody moved. The CEO looked at Daniel. No explanation. Just gone. Ethan frowned. Why? Daniel looked calm. Too calm. The CEO looked at Lily. Then gently asked, Does she know? Daniel looked at his daughter. She shook her head. The CEO became quiet, then asked softly, Can I? Daniel looked at the floor. Long pause. Then, okay. The CEO turned and said, The year Daniel left. He looked at Lily. The room became silent. Daniel didn't move. The CEO continued carefully. She needed treatment. Daniel asked for fewer hours. Nobody breathed. The CEO looked down. The board managers looked uncomfortable. The CEO continued. They said leadership positions require commitment. Daniel smiled faintly, like he'd heard those words too many times. The CEO's voice lowered, so he left. Nobody spoke. The CEO looked at Daniel. You sold your shares. Daniel nodded. The CEO looked at the old sedan outside and disappeared. Lily stared. Her eyes slowly widened. She looked at her father. You never told me. Daniel smiled. You were little. She whispered. Mom? Daniel nodded. Her eyes became wet. She swallowed. And then? Daniel smiled gently. Then we had each other. Silence. No dramatic speech. Just that. The CEO looked away, then quietly said, Past 6 months later. Nobody moved. Daniel simply nodded once. The CEO continued. He never came back. Then, looked around the showroom, and nobody here knew who created half the things they sell. Ethan looked at the old sedan. Then remembered every word he had said, every joke, every expression. His face changed, because suddenly, that old car didn't look old anymore. It looked maintained, carefully, deliberately. Daniel noticed Ethan staring. You looked disappointed in it earlier. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. It has 412,000 miles. Everyone looked. Daniel smiled. Original engine. A manager blinked. What? Daniel nodded. I rebuilt parts. Of course you did. Daniel shrugged. It still works. The CEO looked outside, then slowly asked, Did you build that too? Daniel smiled, and for the first time, his eyes showed something different, not sadness. Not pride. Just quiet history. He looked at the old sedan, then answered. Most of it. The showroom became silent again. Nobody was laughing anymore. The car that told the truth. Nobody spoke after Daniel said it. Most of it. The words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded ordinary, which somehow made them heavier. Employees looked through the showroom glass toward the faded silver sedan sitting outside under the morning sun. Now people noticed things they had ignored before. The wheels didn't match, but not randomly. The rear wheels were wider. The suspension sat lower than expected. The body panels lined up unusually well for such an old vehicle. The exhaust note wasn't rough anymore. It sounded intentional. Ethan stared. Because for the first time he realized, he had judged a machine the same way he judged its owner. Quickly, confidently, wrong. The CEO looked toward the entrance, then turned back. Can we see it? Daniel immediately smiled. No. The CEO laughed. Still the same answers. Seriously? Daniel shrugged. It's messy. Lily looked confused. Dad. She pointed outside. What do you mean you built most of it? Daniel looked at her. She crossed her arms, no avoiding. People smiled. Daniel looked around the showroom. Too many eyes. Too much attention. He quietly said, It's not important. The CEO shook his head. That's usually what people say right before revealing something ridiculous. A few employees laughed nervously. Daniel sighed, then looked at Lily. Okay. He crouched. You remember when your bike chain broke? She nodded. Daniel smiled. And your lamp? She nodded again. And your school desk? She smiled. She smiled. You fixed that too. Daniel looked toward the old sedan. Same idea. Several employees laughed. The CEO stared. No. He pointed. No chance. What? The CEO walked outside. Daniel looked exhausted already. Lily walked beside him. As they reached the parking lot, the luxury showroom reflected behind them like another world, and there it sat. The old sedan. Still unimpressive, still ordinary. Still ignored. The CEO walked around it slowly, then stopped, his eyes narrowed. He bent slightly, touched a panel seam, looked underneath, then suddenly stood up. His expression changed. Oh, people looked confused. He walked around again, opened the hood, stopped, then laughed. Actually laughed. One of the managers stepped forward. What? The CEO looked at him. The manager looked confused. It's an old sedan? The CEO shook his head, then looked at Daniel. You maniac. The CEO turned. This isn't an old sedan. People moved closer. The CEO pointed, custom mounting, hand-built intake. His eyes widened. Then he looked underneath. He looked back at Daniel. No way. You put the prototype geometry in this? Daniel shrugged. Employees exchanged confused looks. The CEO laughed again. You actually did it. Daniel looked embarrassed. Lily blinked. What's prototype geometry? Daniel smiled. Just experiments. The CEO turned immediately. No. This is the suspension design that became our performance line. Silence. People stared. The CEO pointed at the old sedan. This car? He looked at Daniel. You tested everything in this? Daniel nodded. Small smile. It was cheaper. The room stayed silent. Ethan looked stunned. He walked closer. His voice became careful now. You mean, he looked at the old car.